Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a brand new episode of Ball Talk with Chanel. If you're new here, hello, my name is Chanel, and every week we discuss the latest news and scores that's happened in sports. And let me tell you something. Today we have a lot to discuss because we had the March Madness Final Four games for both men's and women's college basketball. We also had the national championship games for both men's and women's college basketball. We also have the NBA playoff picture right now that we need to discuss. And we also got the NHL playoffs that we need to discuss. So we're going to be talking about all of that in this episode. Now, before we get started, please be sure to check out the description box down below. That will give you the links to all of my social media accounts, my TikToks, Instagram, Facebook, my X account, my Threads account, where I post daily bite-sized news and scores that's happened in sports. And also, too, this episode is available on Spotify, and it is also available on Patreon. So be sure to follow my Spotify account, which is linked in the description box down below. And also be sure to check out my Patreon and follow my Patreon account, because that'll also give you access to these episodes as well, 100% free. So now with all of that, now let's go on and talk about what's happened so far. So I want to start first with college basketball, talk about March Madness, everything that's happened. So I am going to start first with the women's basketball, and then I'm going to shift over and talk about men's basketball. So women's basketball, we have a lot to discuss when it comes to this. So let's start first with the Final Four games. Of course, the big one that we need to talk about is UConn versus South Carolina. Now, I have mentioned in my TikTok, which you can go and you can follow, that I thought that it was going to be UConn versus UCLA in the national championship game. That's what I thought. UConn has been blowing teams out, winning by an average of 37 to 38 points. Okay, we saw strong seasons, right, from Sarah Strong, from AZ Fudd, and UConn really looked like the team that could really go back to back. Now we get this Final Four matchup between UConn and South Carolina, and a lot has happened in this game that we need to discuss. So first off, let's just talk about the game in and of itself. South Carolina completely outplayed UConn point blank, period. They had the higher field goal percentage. They had a higher 3-point percentage. They had a better free throw percentage. I mean, they had more points in the paint. It was such a dominant performance by South Carolina. Now, what's crazy is that when you actually look at the stats, right, UConn actually was leading by 2 in the first half of the game. It was just by the third quarter, South Carolina got it together. They tightened up. They played better ball. And let me tell you something. UConn ultimately could not make any of their shots. South Carolina was making all of their shots. Now, it's just no doubt at all that South Carolina, like I said before, completely outplayed UConn. They outcoached UConn. They just completely played such a great game. And South Carolina ended up winning 62 to 48. Now, within this game was where a lot of the madness happened. So first off, you saw Sarah Strong having to change jersey numbers because of the fact that her jersey ripped. And then what happened was that people thought that it was a South Carolina player that ripped her jersey. But then ultimately, Sarah in the post-game conference ended up saying that it was her, that she ripped it by accident, and that's why she just ended up ripping the whole thing. But then there was a big debate as to whether someone else went and ripped the jersey or whether that was completely on Sarah's own accord. So there was that whole controversy that happened. Then, of course, now we need to talk about Gino, because Gino in this game was completely unprofessional and completely classless. So let's start with his interview during the third quarter. Okay, we saw him complain about the refs, talked about how UConn was getting all of the foul calls, right? That the refs were calling a lot of fouls against UConn and that they were calling none against South Carolina in the third quarter. Okay, to the point that he actually swore. He cursed on national TV. Now, you know that it is bad when Gino is cursing on national TV, okay? But that's not the bad part, okay? I think at that point, everyone was just kind of saying like, okay, he's frustrated, he's pissed, he's very competitive, okay, whatever, right? He's really upset. He even acknowledged that his players were not making any shots, okay? But this is just a moment where he's just completely fed up. Okay, fine. But then we need to talk about what happened between him and Dawn Staley at the end of the game, okay? So there is less than a second left of the game, okay? South Carolina at that point secured the win. Okay, they have completely secured that win. Everyone knew they were going to the national championship game. You saw Gino walk over, shake Staley's hand, and then you saw a whole interaction, a whole verbal argument between the two, to the point that assistant coaches and refs had to step into the middle to separate the two. So let's start first with the altercation, okay? Because it is also important to note that Dawn, at the end of that whole altercation, you heard her say, "I am going to beat Gino's ass." Like, you heard her say that 3 times, okay? Saying, "I am going to beat Gino's ass. I'm going to beat Gino's ass. I'm going to beat Gino's ass." Okay? Now, here's the thing. A lot of people on social media want to look at that and say Gino is racist, he's misogynistic, and he's classist, unprofessional, everything else. I do agree that Gino was completely classless and unprofessional. I'm sorry. I think that whole altercation between him and Dawn had nothing to do with the handshake. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say it. It had nothing to do with the handshake. Just from the way that Gino was so pissed, the way he came after Dawn, it gave the fact that this was more than a handshake, because it almost gave that it was very personal, right? It kind of gave that this was like a personal attack, right? Because if this was all about a handshake, you would not hear Dawn say, "I'm going to beat Gino's ass" over a handshake. That's why I think, me personally, even though we don't know what exactly was said during that altercation, I do think that this was a lot more than just a simple handshake. Whether it was Gino basically being a sore loser, whether it was him being angry that they lost, whatever it may be, I think this was more than just a handshake. Now, with that being said, do I think that Gino is racist? No, I honestly did not get racist from this whole altercation, okay? I understand the racial element surrounding that whole altercation, with Dawn having to maintain her composure. She's not allowed to show anger. She's not allowed to basically retaliate because of how the media would treat her as a black woman. I understand that aspect. Now, do I think, though, that Gino is racist because he went after Dawn? No, I don't think so. That altercation to me never gave racist. It gave more sore loser than it did racist. It gave more, my ego is hurt because I just lost and I got my first loss of this season to Dawn Staley, rather than I am angry at you because you are a black woman. That's at least from my personal take, and I know this is going to be something that quite a few people are not going to agree with, but that is just my personal opinion. I don't think that Gino was attacking Dawn because he is racist. I did not get that element from him, but I understand where people are coming from with the racial implications of Dawn having to maintain her composure, having to maintain her professionalism, right? Because of the racial aspects of society. That I do understand. I just don't think Gino in and of itself was racist. Now, could Gino be misogynistic? Maybe. Okay, that one I'm a little on the fence on, especially given that there were some statements that were resurfaced by former Tennessee coach Pat Summitt, where she talked about how she didn't like facing Gino because of how nasty he gets and how much of a sore loser he is, right? I'm kind of paraphrasing there, but you can kind of look up what she was saying beforehand. So is he misogynistic? I'm on the fence about that. I'm a little bit towards no, and I just think he's just genuinely just a very competitive person. But I would buy more of him being misogynistic more than him being racist. Okay, but even the misogyny standpoint, I think I'm a little on the fence on, leaning more towards no. And I think Gino at that point blank period, was just being a sore loser. Like, that's what I think this ultimately came down to, was just him being a sore loser. So we had that whole interaction that happened. Then Gino, of course, like I said beforehand, he doubled down and he said, "I said what I said." And then he put out his first statement saying, "I apologize to the South Carolina staff." And that statement ultimately was really, really bad for Gino. I think, honestly, that made things 10 times worse. And I think the reason why was because he did not say Dawn Staley specifically by her name, right? Because, let's be honest, he didn't have an issue with any of the assistant coaches, right? He didn't argue with the assistant coaches. He didn't argue with the players. He didn't argue with the athletic director for South Carolina if that person was there, right? His argument was purely, squarely with Dawn. So the fact that he never stated in his statement, I apologize to Coach Staley, or I apologize to Dawn. I apologize to Dawn Staley and the staff. The fact that he didn't say any of that, I think, makes it 10 times worse. And I think ultimately he understood that, which is why I think he put out a statement and said that I called Dawn personally and, I apologized to her, and put out that whole statement and everything else. And then with Dawn confirming, saying, yeah, I spoke to Gino beforehand, now let's close this chapter. Let's keep it pushing. Let's move forward from this. But I just think that although it was really a mature move by Gino to apologize to Dawn, I honestly think that he should have given a public apology. I'm going to say it. If you're going to publicly disrespect somebody, I think you should publicly apologize to somebody. Okay? None of this whole, privately, I want to apologize, everything else, right? It's nice that you want to privately apologize. I'm not saying that don't privately apologize. I'm just saying that the apology also needs to be public, just like the disrespect. But ultimately, what I want to say about this too is just the fact that it is really sad that that whole thing happened, because I think that did steer away from how good of a performance South Carolina had. Because every time they want to bring up that Final Four game, that specific game between UConn and South Carolina, it's never Tania Latson's performance, right? Who put on such a great performance. It's never Tessa Johnson's performance, okay? They only focus purely on that moment. And I think that's what sucks about it the most, was just the fact that they focus squarely on that moment. Every single time you want to talk about the Final Four and the UConn South Carolina game, that's the only clip they bring up. They never bring up anybody else and how great of a performance they had. They literally just bring up that part, and that's it. So it was a really devastating situation, but it was really good for South Carolina to have that type of dominant performance and to move on to the national championship game. Now, the second Final Four game that we saw last weekend was between UCLA and Texas. Now, I predicted that UCLA was going to go to national championship game, which, of course, I mentioned beforehand. And let me tell you something. UCLA got their revenge against Texas. Now, if you did not know, UCLA actually lost to Texas during the regular season, and they lost by double digits too. They lost by 11 points. So a lot of people just felt like, okay, well, if Texas was able to beat UCLA in the regular season, this is going to be the team that's going to beat UCLA again. But no, because UCLA from start to finish literally played like they had something to prove. They put on a great performance, having a higher field goal percentage, a higher three-point percentage, more rebounds, more points in the paint. I mean, they completely outplayed Texas. You saw a great performance from Lauren Betts, who put up yet another double-double, right? You saw a good performance by Kiki Rice. You saw a good performance from Gabriela Jaquez. I mean, UCLA truly looked like the team that could be competitive in the national championship game, honestly. Okay? We didn't really see Rory Harmon step up, right? Even though I love Rory as a player, right? We really didn't see her in the game. Madison Booker really didn't have that good of a game, even though, again, she is such a phenomenal player. This was just not her game. Okay, and ultimately, I think Texas just fell apart. They couldn't handle, Kiki Rice's three-point shooting. They couldn't handle Gabriela Jaquez shooting. They couldn't match up against Lauren Betts in the paint, right? Lauren just showed her size, her physicality in the paint. And ultimately, Texas just could not keep up with them. That's ultimately what it came down to. UCLA figured out what their strengths were, what they did not do against Texas in their first meeting. And so they changed it up, and now that's what allowed them to win. So it was a great game by UCLA. Congratulations to them. But I wouldn't be too hung up on Texas and everything else with that loss, because I do think that they could make another run in next season's March Madness tournament. Just as a very, very early prediction. But now we get to the national championship game between South Carolina and UCLA. And let me tell you something. I know I didn't predict for South Carolina to go to the national championship game, but when I saw this matchup, said, okay, this is going to be a really good game. This is going to be a good matchup, right? We are going to get a close back and forth game. We could potentially get an overtime game, right? That's what I thought. And no, we did not get that. In fact, we actually nearly got a blowout game. I mean, UCLA was up by almost 30 points at one point. Yeah, it was a complete complete dominant performance by UCLA. South Carolina did not have an answer for Gabriela Jaquez, who put up 21 points and 10 rebounds. South Carolina did not have an answer for Lauren Betts, right, who put up yet another double-double. Honestly, with South Carolina, the only one who had a good game, honestly, was Tessa Johnson with 14 points and like 3 rebounds. She was the only one who had a really, really good game, okay? Everybody else kind of just did not show up. They were inefficient from the field. It felt like the nerves got to them the entire game. It almost gave that South Carolina just did not know what to do when it came to playing on the big stage like the national championship game, which, look, I understand, right? It is the biggest stage. It is the moment that you've been playing for, right? But it felt like their nerves were just there the entire game. They were rushing shots. They did not have a really good shot selection. Like, it was just not a very good game that we saw from South Carolina. Literally how UConn played against South Carolina is how South Carolina played against UCLA. That's genuinely how it was. Like, it was a little crazy. Now, of course, UCLA ended up winning, and Lauren Betts got most outstanding player, which obviously she, of course, deserved, with her averaging basically double-doubles with every game in March Madness. So that was a big congratulations to UCLA, having their first title, their first NCAA title, I should emphasize, in program history. Because yes, they do have titles for women's basketball, but this was before, being under the NCAA and everything else. So this is their first NCAA title in program history, okay? Which is a little crazy to say. So this is a major congrats to UCLA, and I cannot wait for women's college basketball to start up for the next season. So now that we've talked about women's college basketball, let's actually switch over and talk about men's college basketball. So let's start first, of course, with the Final Four game, and let's start with Michigan versus Arizona. Now, what's really interesting is that Arizona, as we all know, had such a great season, right? They were the number 1 team in the country for a while. Okay, they were. But Michigan also had a really, really good season. They had a really good run. So now you got Michigan versus Arizona. Now, just as an early prediction, right, when I created my bracket, thought it was going to be Duke versus Michigan in the national championship game, with, of course, UConn ruining Duke because of that crazy logo shot by Braylon Mullins. But with that, I kind of looked at Michigan versus Arizona in the Final Four, and I said, okay, you know what? This should be a very, very close game. And no, it was not, because this was practically a blowout game. Yeah, Michigan ended up winning like 91-73. They had a higher field goal percentage, a higher free throw percentage, a higher three-point percentage. Like, Michigan just completely outplayed Arizona. Like, honestly, I think this was one of their best performances for the entire season, including the regular season. I think this was truly such a great performance. We saw a good performance from Adai Mara, who ended the game with like 13 points and 9 rebounds. We saw a really good game from Elliot Cadeau, who ended the game with 13 points and 5 rebounds and 10 assists. I mean, we saw such a great performance by Michigan that I honestly think that they just completely dismantled Arizona. And when I mean dismantled, I mean literally dismantled. Like, I could not believe that they beat Arizona the way they did. Because like I said, I thought this was going to be a very close game, to the point that this could potentially be an overtime game. But no, Michigan just completely outplayed Arizona. But what we did see was in the second Final Four game between UConn and Illinois was a very good game. Okay, but if you actually look at the stats, Illinois was competing against UConn. Okay, yes, UConn had the higher field goal percentage. Yes, UConn had the higher three-point percentage, the higher free throw percentage, and everything. But Illinois, if you actually watch the game, was really trying to compete with UConn. And the crazy thing is that Illinois actually was trying to keep up with UConn. It was just a matter of UConn's defense just prevented Illinois from going on a run. That's all what it was. It was just that Illinois could not go onto a scoring run to allow themselves to get ahead of UConn when it came to scoring. That's truly all that it was. Because we saw a good game from Tomislav Ivicic. We saw a good game from Keaton Wagler. It was purely just the fact that UConn was going on the run and Illinois just ultimately could not keep up with them. That's ultimately what it came down to. That's all it came down to. It's not like UConn had like a very dominant performance against Illinois. It was just that Illinois could not go onto a scoring run to go and try to slow down UConn. They just couldn't, right? So it was such a great performance by them. Congratulations. And now we get into the national championship game between Michigan and UConn. Now, what's really interesting is just the fact that Michigan ended up winning 69-63. But let me tell you something. Michigan honestly should have won by a lot more, and here is why. Now, they were relatively even when it came to fouls. It was just that Michigan had higher field goal percentage and had a higher free throw percentage, but UConn had the higher 3-point percentage, okay? And it's not as if UConn had a bad game. We saw a good game from Terrace Reed. We saw a good game from Carabin. It was just a matter of that Michigan, again, was just scoring, and UConn's defense, although it was good, it was just not enough to be able to keep up with Michigan. In fact, Michigan actually became really sloppy in the game, and UConn was able to take the lead, right? It was just then that UConn could not capitalize on it, and they ended up falling apart, and that's how Michigan was able to regain the lead back. So UConn actually had a chance to go and win this game. It's not like UConn played a terrible game, because they didn't, right? It was just a matter of that UConn, once they took over and they were taking the lead, it was just that they could not go over. They just could not capitalize on it and keep that momentum going, right? They eventually slowed down. They got very sloppy. They got comfortable, and that's what allowed Michigan to go and regain that lead. Now, we did see a great performance from Elliot Cadeau again, right, who put on 19 points with 3 rebounds. And we even saw a good game from Mirage Johnson. So Michigan ended up having a good game. Now, was it as good as their performance against Arizona? No. I wouldn't say it was that good of a performance, but nevertheless, they did put on a relatively good performance that allowed them to win. Now, Elliot Cadeau did end up winning Most Outstanding Player, which, of course, I think that is very well deserved because he was a really key point for this game. And ultimately, it's really interesting because a lot of people were talking about how Elliot Cadeau is trash and he's not going to get a chance, and it was good that he left North Carolina, when really the dude was talented. The dude is extremely talented. It was just a matter of him needing to be with the right coach, with the right program, and someone that could really hone in onto his development. And I think that's what Michigan was, right? That's what Dusty May did for him, was made him a better player, right? Because we saw his development from when he was playing at North Carolina to now playing at Michigan. So it was a really, really good tournament. Congratulations to Michigan. And I cannot wait for the college basketball season to start up for next season. So now with all of that, now let's actually switch over and talk about the NBA. Because by the time you are watching this video, the NBA regular season has officially ended. But because I am recording this on a Sunday, right before all the games happen, let's actually talk about what the playoff picture could potentially look like. So let's start first with the Eastern Conference to see exactly what the bracket is looking like. So right now it is looking like we will be seeing the Magic face the 76ers, and we'll also see the Hornets face the Miami Heat, both in the play-in tournament. Now, here's what's interesting. The winner of the Hornets and the 76ers will be facing the number 2 seed Celtics in the first round of the playoffs. Now, the loser of that game will be facing the winner of the Heat and the Hornets game. Now, the winner of that game will be facing the 1 seed Detroit Pistons in the first round of the playoffs. Now, just as an early prediction, I think that both the Celtics and the Pistons should be able to win those series. Just as an early prediction, but I'll talk more about that in my next episode next week. And then outside of the play-in tournament, we will also see the 4 seed Cavs face the 5 seed Hawks in the first round of the playoffs. And we will also see the 3 seed Knicks face the 6 seed Raptors. So this first round is going to be really interesting. The way the Eastern Conference is looking right now when it comes to the playoffs is actually really interesting. We have the Hawks in the playoffs, and this is a team that is without Trae Young after they have traded Trae to the Washington Wizards. We see the Toronto Raptors now making their appearance in the playoffs, Right now, we see the Cavs making their appearance in the playoffs after that big trade with Darius Garland and James Harden, right? So I think this playoff picture with the East is going to be really, really interesting to see how everything plays out. So now let's actually look at the Western Conference and see what is happening here. So now looking at the Western Conference, right, we see the Suns and the Portland Trailblazers facing each other, and we also see the Clippers and the Warriors facing each other in the play-in tournament. Now, the winner of the Suns and the Trailblazers game will be facing the 2-seed Spurs in the first round of the playoffs, and then the loser will be facing the winner of the Warriors and the Clippers. And then the winner of that game will play the number 1 seed Thunder in the playoffs. Now, outside of all of that, we see the 4-seed Lakers potentially facing the 5-seed Rockets in the first round of the playoffs. And we also see the 3-seed Nuggets face the 6-seed Timberwolves. Now, what's really interesting here, right? We see the San Antonio Spurs, right? Not only making it to the playoffs, but now they're in the playoffs as a 2-seed, of course, led by Victor Wembanyama. We see, of course, the Thunder go back to the playoffs as a 1-seed. Right? We could potentially see Golden State out of the playoffs this year, right? Meanwhile, you see the Lakers as a 4-seed. I mean, it is really, really crazy what this bracket is looking like for this year. Okay, so this whole thing is going to be really interesting. And then just as an early prediction for the Thunder series and then the Spurs series, I think the Thunder and the Spurs could win those series in the first round. But like I said, early prediction, I'll talk more about that in next week's episode. But what I want to point out is how this bracket is just about complete. Now, like I said beforehand, I am filming this on Sunday, so this whole thing could change, right? We could see other teams in the play-in tournament. We could see some teams officially make it to the playoffs and not have to play in the play-in tournament. Whatever it may be, right? This is kind of sort of what the playoff picture is looking like as of right now. Right? So this playoffs, I think, for the NBA is truly going to be interesting, but I will speak more about the playoffs in next week's episode when the bracket is officially complete. But now, speaking of playoff picture and everything else, now let's switch over from the NBA and talk about the NHL. Now, unlike the NBA, the NHL regular season does not end until Thursday, okay? And right now, we do have majority of the teams that have clinched a playoff berth. So let's start first with the Eastern Conference and take a look at what the playoff picture is looking like as of right now. So right now we have the Sabres that have clinched the playoff berth, and right now they are the top team in the Atlantic Division, but they did not clinch the division as of yet. We also have the Lightning that could potentially clinch the division, right? And they have also clinched a playoff berth. And we also have the Canadiens that have officially clinched a playoff berth. Now, moving on to the Metropolitan Division, we see the Carolina Hurricanes not only clinch a playoff berth, but they also clinch the division. We also see the Pittsburgh Penguins clinch a playoff berth. And then we also see not only the Senators, but then also the Bruins clinch a playoff berth as wild cards. But like I said beforehand, we are not done with this Eastern Conference. We can still see teams such as the Capitals clinch a playoff berth. We can see teams such as the Columbus Blue Jackets go and clinch a playoff berth. But right now, we do have majority of the teams that are in the Eastern Conference who have clinched a playoff spot. So now let's move on to the Western Conference. So right now you have the Colorado Avalanche, who not only clinched the playoff berth, not only clinched the division, but have also clinched the President's Trophy. They have the best regular season out of all teams in the NHL. We also see the Dallas Stars have went and clinched the playoff berth. We also see the Wild have clinched the playoff berth. We see the Vegas Golden Knights have clinched the playoff berth, and right now they are the top team in their division, but they have not clinched the division as of yet. We still have the Edmonton Oilers have clinched the playoff berth, right, where they could also go and clinch the division, right? But we also have the Utah Mammoth that have also clinched a spot in the playoffs as a wild card. Now, like I said, just like with the Eastern Conference, with the Western Conference, we are not done yet. We can still see the Nashville Predators go and clinch a playoff berth. We can see the Anaheim Ducks go and clinch a playoff berth. We can still see the Winnipeg Jets go and clinch a playoff berth because their season is not over yet. So that is what the NHL playoff picture is looking like as of right now. So it is going to be really interesting to see how it looks next week, because by next week's episode, we will know exactly which teams are in the playoffs and how exactly this bracket is going to look. But that is all for today. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Next week, we will be talking more about the NBA playoffs. We'll be talking about the WNBA draft. We'll be talking about the NHL playoffs and so much more. So I will see you next Monday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And thank you so much. Bye.